Responding to questions about no longer televising White House press briefings, Steve Bannon said that the reason was because Sean Spicer got fat. Okay, wait a minute. Steve Bannon is calling out another human being's physical appearance. Isn't that kind of like the pot calling the kettle blotchy? The Trump Report starts now.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Oh, and that's right. That was indeed the night that the lights didn't really go out in Georgia. I mean, they were kind of on and they flickered. Those lights flickered for a moment.
A glimmer of hope.
And then they stayed on, basically. But welcome to the Trump Report, and we'll talk about that. And Josh, you don't need to turn this down. We need to definitely get to the bridge. We need to take it home, Vicki Lawrence, a.k.a. Mama from Mama's Family. Little known fact. It's actually a fairly well-known fact. I'm Christian Bladt. This is the Trump Report. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. Joined as always by Chelsea Galicia, whom you can find at Chelsea Galicia.
Yes,
conveniently enough, the only one whose Twitter is actually just her name.
Right.
Because next to her is Scott Moore at SMan80. So you have to hunt around for us. But Chelsea's very easy to find. And honestly, if you have to follow only one of the three of us, it's Chelsea.
She's the one to follow.
Obviously.
Yeah, that's true.
And don't forget the show is Trump Report ABTV.
Your clever trolling is
That's right.
can't be missed. Should not be missed.
Scott's clever trolling will be an upcoming segment here on the show. But as will be more songs from Vicki Lawrence. No, probably not. But so, as I alluded to in the intro, the special runoff election in Georgia's 6th. I almost said the wrong number, and then that would have been embarrassing. It went from being too close to call to still close, but we'll call it. CNN's projecting Karen
I was like,
Handel.
wait, the Trump Report projects.
Yeah, the Trump Report projects that Drexel Hurd is the winner. No, because Drexel takes the summer off for politics, apparently. Nothing is going to happen this summer.
You have to take a summer recess. Everyone needs a summer recess.
Political culture fans, if there's a void for politics, just come on over here. We'll still be here, except for 2 weeks from now. It's 4th of July, because we love America.
Right.
And the studio will be closed. So those two things. But anyway, Karen Handel, 52.6% to 47.4%. The final will definitely be different than that because this is with 66% reporting. But if CNN says that they can call it, well, they were so right on election night. There's no reason to not doubt them, really.
Well, I don't know. Donald Trump might. Fake news.
That's true.
So.
There might be some fake news here, but this is the kind of fake news that I think he would like. Scott, let's talk a little bit about this. This is a race that should never have been close just because of the simple fact of the geography of it. So it includes DeKalb County and you said Fulton County. And is this Newt Gingrich's old district or part of it? Because there's been some redistricting since then.
They did switch it around a little bit after for the 2012 election. After the 2010.
Yeah, if these are counties that once voted for Newt Gingrich, you have to figure it's not a particularly strong blue stronghold.
No, it's not. I mean, you have a couple things that are going on with this district. Is way in the past, the South was firmly Democratic. And in fact, before Newt Gingrich won, it had been Democratic since before the Civil War. So Newt Gingrich was actually the first one in '78 to flip the seat to Republican, and now it's been Republican ever since. And even if you look back to '76 when Jimmy Carter ran for president, and you see the demographic changes that are happening in Georgia and in most of the South now, where you had the rural areas were Democratic, and then you started going to the urban areas and they were Republican, and now over the past, since the late 70s, and going into 80 with the Reagan landslide and the switch of the conservatives and the rural votes being Republican, we've seen change now, and it's now encroaching because this is the Atlanta suburbs. So this is right outside, just north of downtown Atlanta, and we're seeing this slowly become more purple. And even looking, and we can get into South Carolina 5 as well, but looking at these four places that had the special elections since Trump picked these nominees, Montana, going back to Montana, and in Kansas earlier this year, you're looking at very, very, very Republican districts because, of course, the Republicans didn't want to be put in a place where they could end up giving up seats before the 18 midterms. So all four of these were supposedly strong Republican seats. And as we've seen since these special elections have happened, they've all tightened considerably. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, it's, close, but it doesn't mean anything,
Well, ultimately, it doesn't mean anything because they lost, but it being close at least says, okay, not everybody's as happy as some on the right, Sean Spicer, would like us to think.
Right, and that's the thing is, like, yes, they can have the short-term win, the Republicans can, but in the long term, they should really be scared, because this does not bode well in 18 when you see these very red Republican districts all are within single digits. None of them have been beyond single digits as far as the final. And just back in 16, a lot of these places went 18, 20, sometimes more than 20 points for the Republican candidate or for Trump himself. So to see the tightening happen in such a short period of time should really scare the Republicans going into 18. Because even South Carolina 5, for instance, it didn't have the big turnout. The Georgia 6 had the most money put into any
Well, that's what I was going to talk to Chelsea about, because we were talking beforehand.
In
Chelsea,
history.
How much money did this race have that you were reading?
I understand it was $40 million.
Yeah.
And when you spend that kind of money, and neither side really has a resounding victory, but especially when you spend all that money and you lose, this is something that you can point to as, okay, there's a little bit, it's trending a little bit more blue than you would expect, but this isn't. I would say, Chelsea, this isn't really something for Democrats to actually be excited about, to spend all that money and not win.
Well, not at all.
Yep.
I think it was a little bit of a pipe dream to think that we could flip the signal in the first place.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, it was very optimistic, but
we thought with how unpopular Trump is and how egregiously the policies that they're fighting for on the Republican side are so damaging.
And how he only won by 1.5 points, even in the general. He only won by 1.5 points.
Right, but
so it was very close.
Obviously, it's just sort of very anecdotally looking at people voting in November and people voting now, but they're probably not as upset about Trump as a lot of the other spots in the country that you're talking about are. Because I think that if people were really upset, then a lot of those red votes would have stayed home or, written in somebody else, Drexel Hurd, I don't know. They wanted Mickey Mouse. That's a great ticket. Mickey's not on top, though. He's the VP. Anyway, besides the point, I think that it doesn't really, it's all nice. It's like, okay, it's a moral victory, which of course is nothing that you can.
It's a
very expensive moral victory.
I'm not sure a victory at all.
If they won, if this was reversed and it was a razor thin margin, then the narrative turns into, well, of course, look at how much money they spent and they still barely won. Well, the Republicans also spent a lot of money, not as much as the Democrat, but
they spent a lot.
They spent a lot of money, and they barely held on to this seat that they really should not have.
That was Newt Gingrich's seat. That was Tom Price's seat that he won by like 23 points in November. So yeah, it's definitely it should be a wake up call for Republicans. But of course, they're going to spin it and say this is all great. Look at all the money the Democrats spent. It didn't work. We still held on to the seats. But again, these were 4 seats going back to these special elections that were all purposely picked because of where they were. And Georgia's 6, and it's going to continue to get closer. So if Republicans don't carefully watch this, it's at their own peril, because once we get into 18 and we move into future, these regions are become more Democratic, the more urban areas, and the 6 is like that suburban area that's just around that cusp. Highly educated, really not the Trump voter, and also Handel was not really the most Trump supportive candidate anyways from before, when in the primary back in April. So this is somebody that had some distance from Trump, and probably some of those more moderate Republicans that might have been more nervous to vote for someone else that might have been more closely aligned with Trump. They probably felt more comfortable voting for her. She also has the statewide name recognition, former Secretary of State. She's known. So I think there was a little bit more of a comfort level with some of those moderate Republicans that might have been turned away. And also you have to look at other factors like even the rain. It was very rainy earlier today. Did any of those people maybe get turned away because they didn't feel as motivated because the weather was bad? You have a lot of different things. And personality also plays a role. And that's the other thing, too, is that every time you're looking at these local races and these special elections, their characteristics are all very different. And it's very localized, especially in districts when you're voting for Congress, more than a senator, more than a statewide election. They're very specific on personality, on region that's different from a statewide election. And
the fact of the matter is, these special and runoff elections, when they happen, you have to be a little bit more plugged in than most average voters. It's almost like being such a big fan of a baseball team, you know all their minor league
Right.
games, you know, and this is like, you have to know when that is, because on this very show I talked about how in Louisiana in December I was there, my friend went to go vote in that special election, which was a pretty big deal, and I think by 3 p.m. it had been it was under 100 people had been at that district.
Yeah,
So,
and that is the
yeah.
sad thing. There was even things, even with all the blanketed ads in Georgia 6,
Yeah.
there were still people that didn't even realize there was
Yeah.
an election today.
Right,
And that's
so-
part of the problem, as that people are not as tuned in, or they just start tuning it out because they're seeing all these commercials and these ads, and they're not even paying
Over it.
attention anymore.
But
Exactly.
speaking of tuned in and not tuning out, we want people to stay tuned in to us,
Yes.
so we'll move on. Josh, when you get a moment, if you could put up the chat so we
But
can see
the one thing
what's going on.
I'll add about, at least for
Yeah,
South
sure,
Carolina
absolutely.
5, is where they didn't spend a lot of money and it wasn't as invested. It actually was only a 3-point difference for the Republican, and they had less people voting. But that's the same thing. It was sort of a quiet race. The Republicans didn't really invest. The Democrats, because they felt it was in a very strong Republican area for Mick Mulvaney's seat. And as it turned out, it was really a 3-point difference, which again should scare Republicans thinking about that, when that's an area that went 20-30 points for Trump, and it's only a 3-point difference now. So that's again another wake-up call for Republicans if they're not careful.
Our friend in the booth, our friend in the chat, Josh is our friend in the booth, but our friend in the chat, Storage Yard Resident, points out June 14th was President Trump's 71st birthday. He doesn't look a day over 89, so happy birthday, President Trump. I did see that, and I knew how old he was. It's just when you actually hear it said that now he's 71, and he's been president for a few months, and you're like, wow. You know, I think my grandfather had his driver's license taken away before he was 71, but that's not, that's a specific instance. I'm not making a blanket statement about it, although, Donald Trump doesn't drive. There's no way.
No.
When was the last time you think he drove? And golf carts don't count.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I
But
don't really want him
anyway,
to be
and
driving.
Kamani Brooks says excuses. Look, we're not making excuses. We're saying that, neither side, obviously the Republicans should be glad that they won, but neither side should be like, oh, this was a great day for us.
Right. I think they could say they won the battle, but the long-term war is just getting started, and they should be worried. If they're not worried, they're going to allow themselves to lose in 18, because that's when the real races happen, and that'll be the real sign. If Democrats don't do well, then it's easy to say, okay, well, excuses, but it's going to be a different story.
Yes, exactly. So we will move on to what started off and is still a terrible story, but the good news within the bad story is that Republican Congressman and House Majority Whip, Louisiana Representative Steve Scalise, he's been upgraded from critical to serious, and he's showing signs of improvement, and he, of course, was one of 5 people that were shot when a gunman opened fire Wednesday as the Republican baseball team practiced in Virginia. He's required several surgeries. So the reason why we're talking about that is, first, that's good news to hear that he's at least doing somewhat better. You hope to hear that he pulls through and makes as much of a recovery as he can. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is how quickly the story was politicized, that it was a Republican that got shot, and it immediately turned into, well, how do you feel about gun control? And it was just like, you can't wait an hour, you can't wait, maybe a couple days. And then, of course, there was the other side of it when we found out the shooter was a 66-year-old named James Hodgkinson, who was reportedly a Bernie Sanders supporter, and he had written on social media that it's time to destroy Trump and company, and he was found to have a list of Republican lawmakers that he was looking for, and he was said to have reportedly been seen near the ball field in the parking lot asking, hey, are Republicans practicing in that field? And, thank God that because it was somebody in leadership, that there was, Capitol Hill police were there, so it could have obviously been a lot worse. And I think it's important to mention that, he's a left-leaning person, because when it's somebody who's conservative, they'll always make sure to tell you that right away. And on the flip side of that is, for some reason, Caitlyn Jenner thought it was important to say liberals can't even shoot straight. And I was just like,
wow, I missed that.
yeah,
I
I was
saw
like,
that.
Caitlyn, people want to like you, but you
make it
just
really
make it real
hard.
tough.
don't make it easy.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on sort of the whole thing, and I'll start with you, Chelsea, because, I started with Scott last time. That's the real reason.
Well, I heard from accounts, people that were there, and I mean, this was like a whole long 10-minute ordeal with people hiding and running and crawling after they'd been shot. I mean, I cannot imagine. I guess could imagine, because so many people were giving accounts of what it was like, and to see
Right,
people
but
drop
to
down.
try and put yourself in the situation and actually imagine going through it, I can't imagine. I can imagine having to see something terrible happen off in the distance, but yeah, I don't think anybody can really identify with what they actually went through.
And I was one of those who thought, well, you know, okay, let's talk about gun control now.
No, we can talk about it, but it was just the way that people were saying it right away. You know what I mean? And because he was a Republican.
You know, but there's
Like,
everybody does
we didn't
too
know,
soon.
okay, but we didn't know if he was gonna live, you know, and I was just like, it was so fast, and I was like, let's let him get to the hospital, you know, let's put him on life support, put him on a ventilator.
I don't think people waited a moment after San Bernardino.
And that's not right either.
Right.
So
You know, neither one of those is right. That, you know, just because
think we're
the
gonna
other
get
side does something wrong doesn't mean that, you know,
I
your
don't
side
think we're
gets
going to
something
slow
wrong.
anybody down on
Well,
making their
not the way that the world
comments.
works now. The fact that you
Right.
can make instant comments. The fact that,
Exactly,
like, right
exactly.
now, somebody in the chat could say something, you know, but although, actually, no.
So, I mean, is there a respectful period of time that you're supposed to wait? I mean, if we want to be conscious about commenting too soon, I mean, what's the rule?
Yeah, I
Since
mean,
there
I'm not
is
talking
one.
about people just posting on social media, although there was a lot of that. You know, you feel like your organizations that are covering it as breaking news as it is, you don't necessarily throw to somebody who's going to, you know, politicize it in the moment. And I would say this about, you know, anything.
I mean,
really.
it's difficult not to politicize something like this that happened to a group of politicians
That was politicized
who
because
generally
the
vote
person-
against gun control
Right.
in
I-
any sense.
Exactly.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that it
If
is
they
very
hadn't-
bad form.
If they hadn't done it, people would be like, I can't believe they didn't. I mean, how did they not get that connection and talk about it and analyze? So, anyways, and in my mind, I was like, look, here we have a situation where we have trained officers with guns, because the Republican argument is that if everybody had guns, you know, you could take down the bad guy. At least two trained Capitol Police were there, and this still went on for 10 minutes.
Sure.
So the argument that, you know, everybody arming themselves, and even if those Republicans carried guns, I doubt that they had them on them while they were playing baseball. So it's just, I hope somebody sees the
I know. I was going to say that
ridiculousness.
it does. It turns into like a gun battle.
And if this were, you know, if the leader wasn't there, there wouldn't have been the security, and you feel like it would have gone on for much longer because there would have been no one there. And, you know, we don't need to get into the specifics of the gun debate, but what I will say is that there is a very well-researched book, it's a few years old now, by John Lott, called More Guns, Less Crime. And when you look, I've talked to him about it at length, and believe me, he can talk about it a lot. And it just, numbers show that in areas where there are concealed carry, that there is less crime. And whether it's something that would work as a blanket anyway, it's good to have that as conversation. You know, I would say that that's something that should be like, okay, well, let's consider it and let's get people together and talk about it, not just say we can't have any guns. Because I mean, if this were, you know, I don't know, if this were another country, let's say if this was in the UK, but they probably would have had like billy clubs and not had guns.
But that is the difference. If you were to look at other countries that have enacted strict gun control and seen how their crime has gone down because of their strict gun control, like Australia, like in the UK, in Germany, in places where they've actually implemented. So you could also say the other side, but having stricter gun control does limit. And the problem is that we're such a gun-happy culture that now it is out of control, because now everyone wants to have guns, and giving the good guys a gun just now leads to gun battles. And do we really want to live in a society like that where now everyone has a gun and now we're shooting each other?
And, but in those countries, bad guys will always find a way to get a gun.
Well, and that's the same thing here, though, too. So that's what I'm saying. Now we're going to arm everyone and we're just going to be in gun battles. So as soon as somebody takes out a gun, then the supposed good guys now shooting back, and everyone's cross-shooting. And
I'm going to venture to say that even in the areas where crime may have gone down, which I'm not even sure I believe, what about accidental shootings? Did those go up in those areas? Because my understanding...
It's a good question. I actually don't know the answer
and
to that.
suicides that go up, and children shooting, taking a gun and shooting.
So just focusing on crime, I think, is
right.
Not fair. And here, let's talk about the flip side of this story. Okay, so last week, the officer, Geronimo Yanez, who shot and killed Philando Castile, who had just disclosed to the officer who had pulled him over, I I'm going to tell you, officer, he was very forthcoming. I have a firearm on me. And then he was shot like 5 seconds later. So where was that guy's rights? He had a legal permit to carry the gun. He told the officer he had the gun, and he still ended up dead. So this gun is good for.
Unfortunately, that's more of a race issue than a gun issue. Because if Scott or I had said, "Officer, I have a gun on me," we probably wouldn't have gotten shot. Is that right? No, it's not right at all.
But it's still both, though. Yeah. It's still the fact that you have that, but then you also have the fact of this gun-happy cop that's now going to blow someone's head off for saying that. And that, again, there are bigger issues, and by saying you have a gun and you're the good guy with a gun doesn't make it better. And then to politicize this whole thing, I get it, because he clearly was going after Republicans and didn't like them, but we should also be talking about mental health issues as well, and that has not been discussed, because clearly he had mental health issues.
No.
And that's something that we don't talk about, and we don't talk about the fact that Republicans made it easier in the past couple months for mental patients have mental issues to be able to still get guns, and that's something that's not been talked about either.
I don't know. I, for one, thought that we would have had a more open debate on mental illness after the tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut.
Exactly.
I mean, or as Alex Jones calls it, the sound stage where they
sound
did
stage
the
for the
moon
government.
landing. Yeah.
But that's where they should be starting with. This should make people even more, and it just doesn't. So if this is not going to change anything,
no,
but the thing is, we
here's
should
the
be
thing.
talking
These
about
are
mental
all
health
conversations we need to have, and here's the problem:
that are more important than politicizing them. No, it's just been politicized right away instead of talking about the real core of the issue there.
That somebody who was there,
we're talking about the shooting on the baseball field last week. Okay.
Said, okay, now we need to look at this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and look,
now affected one of their own.
And if they look at it and it doesn't change their mind, you know what? At least you'd hope it would if you're somebody that feels strongly about gun control.
Especially him himself.
If he takes a look at it and he's like, I still feel the same. At least people are open to considering the other side, which is so hard this day.
That wasn't it 15 members and 2 senators who were there? Yeah. That having that many people involved and their colleagues wouldn't think twice about, oh my God, what are we legislating or not legislating that allows this to happen? That could have been me. That still could be me. I think, they don't care really about children, but maybe they care about themselves.
Right. I was thinking maybe they'll care about themselves. I think they need to stop that and think actually witnessing something like that to maybe think we should do something about that. And again, go back to mental health issues, and that should be a core concern too, of making sure by allowing patients to be able to easily obtain guns or make it easier for them, which the Republican Congress did. How does that benefit society in general by allowing those type of things?
Everybody's concerned about terrorism. Terrorists or potential terrorists who are on no-fly lists can still get a gun. That doesn't make any sense for a party that is so concerned about terrorism. The regulations, the hoops that you're supposed to go through to get a gun sound like they should be effective, but clearly they're not. And I don't know what the fix is there, but it seems like there are these steps in place that should make it difficult, but obviously people who really want to get a gun, such as the case in Newtown, Connecticut, you can get your hands on it. And I don't know what the fix is there, and
right. I mean, there is no easy fix. It's like all the other big social ills, like homelessness and other things.
Yeah,
but the thing is
what
that
you're
they should
saying
be working towards. It starts at the micro level, and people should start looking at that. Like, they want to make it easier for states to be able to, if you have like a concealed weapon permit in Arizona, you can bring it into California. Federally, right now, states have a right to be able. And again, the party that's supposedly all about states' rights when it's convenient for them. But now they want to say, well, if you have a concealed permit in Arizona, you can bring it to California, where you're not allowed to have it right now, and that's supposedly okay.
I feel like when you cross over from Arizona to California, you should have to change your money. I mean, it's a different planet over
I know,
there.
Right?
But Scott, what you're saying is that it's not an easy fix. So let's see, racism, gun control, and mental health. Those are not easy fixes. I was kind of hoping we've got another 20, 25 minutes or so. I thought we were going to get to the bottom of it.
I know we're going to have it solved.
Yeah.
Like a sitcom, we're going to have it solved in 22 minutes.
All right,
and happy ending.
This is a special two-parter. So anyway, let's see what's going on in the chat. All these dumbasses said is more people need guns the way a bunch of untrained people could have blindly returned fire. Sean Newton. Thank you, Sean.
There was a lot of gunfire exchanged in
There
this
was
baseball.
there definitely was.
fiasco.
And our friend R. Scott Brown, thanks for being back. Nothing changes if nothing changes, which, I mean, if you think about it for a second, it's
Pretty true.
It's very astute. It seems like a very simplistic phrase, but actually, you're absolutely right. Something will need to change, and in the case that Scott was mentioning, at least there's somebody willing to, like, let's take another look at this, and we'll see where we go from there. But regardless of what you think of his politics and even how he voted on gun legislation, it would be great to hear that Congressman Scalise is doing much better, and he can.
Right.
You know,
I mean, but
let's
come on.
see he's back in 2 months
How-
voting the wrong way on legislation.
Well,
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I really want to hear. I want him to survive, just because he should survive, and also because I want to hear him talk about guns now,
Right.
and where he stands on them, and if there's any reasonable control that he thinks he'll support now.
Moving on to a story that we touched on last week, after the terrible situation that ended in Otto Warmbier's death. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. Tourism to North Korea comes under scrutiny.
I didn't even know that tourism
and it
was allowed
should.
there
I know,
in the
you
first
can't
place.
really get into
So-
I
her
thought it was
easily.
Dennis Rodman himself. by
The
law.
company that offered the trip to I said North Carolina. It's a lot different. North Korea will no longer be taking Americans there. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. And this was a company that they sort of marketed extreme tourism, like go to the places your mother wouldn't want you to go to. You know what? As you find when you get older, sometimes mom's right. There's, you know what, maybe you don't need to be out at 3 a.m. Maybe you don't need to run with scissors, and maybe you shouldn't go to North Korea. So, that's great, but what a terrible situation, and I don't know how you can have any kind of hope at having a relationship with a country like this. And I guess the answer is you don't.
No.
Not with somebody crazy like Kim Jong-un. Honestly, Dennis Rodman is probably the only appropriate ambassador to go over there, because you know what? No sane person's going to be able to talk any sense into him.
No.
So maybe Rodman will. I don't know. But most likely not. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, we talked a little bit about it last week. It's such a terrible situation because clearly, he ended up in a medically induced coma. Or as they
came
call
home in a vegetative state,
well,
so like kind of awake, like your eyes are open,
right.
but you're not.
Yeah,
not there.
exactly. And they
Conscious.
clearly knew that he didn't have that much time left, so they're like, all right, we can't have this happen on our
Right.
soil.
Yep. So send him
Yeah.
home.
So it's a terrible story. You feel awful for him and the family. It could be avoided if you, one, don't go to North Korea, and two, if you go somewhere like North Korea, you got to keep your head down. Don't
Right.
try and don't even sneeze in public. You need to know not to do.
Do you think that he really tried to steal a sign? I wonder if that's.
No, I mean, let's just say that it's, maybe he was trying to take a picture of a sign, as we were talking about last week.
He
Even
took
that
something
would
to draw
upset them.
attention.
Yeah.
Right.
And let's put it this way, they singled out him as opposed to somebody else who was with him. So I
Right.
don't know what he did. I'm sure it didn't warrant 15 years of hard labor, much less whatever got him in this medically induced coma.
And which we won't find out because the family has declined to allow an autopsy to be performed.
Were they Christian Scientists or?
The article I read didn't say that.
Okay, I just didn't know the reason why, but
Yeah, you think you'd want to know.
yeah. So
everything.
I mean, it's a terrible story from a terrible place run by a terrible man. And some people say that about our country, but it's easier for us to look at North Korea and say, I mean, as bad as Trump is, he at least doesn't have that haircut. Although, if somebody wants to mock up a JPEG of Donald Trump, I should send this to Stephen Lemieux, who does the great thumbnails
does.
that you see
Yes,
for AfterBuzz
he's-
TV for each episode. He does
he's
this.
amazing.
I want to see Kim Jong-un's, or even Kim Jong-il,
If they
one
just
of their haircuts on Donald Trump.
swapped.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
oh yeah, yes, that's what we need to see.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to email that to Stephen, and we'll hopefully see that
See.
next week.
But yes, it is a horrible. It's horrible. The concern I have though is it's still not the place to start getting into threats of war, because if you start destabilizing that region, it's going to be really catastrophic for not just U.S. but for that area. It's going to be very bad because you have to think about, again, the geography, and you think about South Korea and how close Seoul, the capital, is. 10 million people are within like 50 miles of the border there.
Yeah.
it won't take much to be able to do really serious damage there and have generations of having to pick up the piece of that vacuum now left behind in North Korea. So it's a really delicate situation, and I do think, like you said, if you do want to take these risky trips, you have to go in with an open mind and be known that you're not in the U.S. anymore. And I think a lot of, especially younger people, go and travel and think they can just do whatever they want.
I went to Rio when I was in law school for spring break. I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
You went to a third world country, right? And it was.
But I've been to Mexico a lot.
But I think it's just people have an expectation they can do whatever they want when they leave because they're used to what's in the U.S.
Yeah, it's like when you go to the Bahamas and you leave the resort, or any of these countries and you leave the resort. You're just like, oh, wait a minute, no, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't in the brochure. Yeah,
but I think it's just something that people do have to be very careful about doing, because when you go to another country, you have to abide by the rules. As much as we don't necessarily agree with whatever's going on there and their government, you have to be very careful because these things do happen, and you have to know going into something like that.
There's 3 other people still over there.
Yeah, and when I went backpacking through Europe was before 9/11, and even then there were a group of Americans, and this was a fairly common practice. On their backpack, they'd have the Canadian flag on it, just because they didn't want to call attention to themselves. The Canadians were very clear, like, look, we are Canadians. And I guess enough Americans were like, oh, yeah, we're Canadians too.
Yeah.
How about we go somewhere? And I think we've talked a lot about Cuba on this panel, and we seem to be in different places on that. That's another one of those places, though. It's like you're taking a risk, especially now that, the easing of tensions have kind of gotten a little tense again. When you would go, I knew people that went 10 years ago, and you can go through Mexico, you can do whatever.
That's what my friends did.
You're not getting your passport stamped, and if something goes wrong, which fortunately for anybody that I know, nothing ever went wrong, but if it did, like when you're in a lot of countries, even semi-hostile countries, there's an embassy, there's someone who can help you if it really hits the fan. But when you're in Cuba, you're really on your own.
At least now.
At least now. Now it's a little different. Yeah. But when you're in North Korea, you're on your own. As unfortunately you found, you're on your own. And for a country that can't really keep the lights on, which I guess the episode could have been titled "The Night the Lights Went Out in Pyongyang," but it's not as catchy. And I think that this is what they do. It's everything's very tightly regimented. They turn off everybody's electricity at night so that Kim Jong-un can watch Dennis Rodman videos and watch him play basketball or whatever he does. God only knows what he does at night, by the way.
Right.
So
scary.
I don't know. It's scary, and I guess the moral of the story is be careful when you travel, because even unfortunately.
On the flip side of that, I don't want Americans to now not want to travel.
No, but it's
that
certain
just makes
places.
it dumber.
Be vigilant, and honestly,
go
if you
out and travel, experience, but be smart about it.
If you live in a big city, you're very used to it already.
Right.
I remember when I was in Rome, I remember I met a girl from somewhere in Northern California, and she said how terrible the subways were in Rome. And I went down in there, and I was like, oh, she has never been to New York, because I wouldn't eat off the floor, but there were no rats eating off the floor. So, I was just like, oh, yeah. So if you're from a big city anywhere in America, you're probably always constantly vigilant enough. But it's always good advice, and especially in these times. And unfortunately, even if you go to somewhere that you would think is, I'm using air quotes, safe, England or Paris,
the UK
or
now, or
any of those places, unfortunately, you're not as safe as you might think you are. So just be careful.
Right.
Anyway, oh boy, there's a lot of comments from Lisa Payne Shariko. Don't you have to sign a waiver before entering North Korea? I don't think so. I think it's all on the down low.
Whose waiver are you signing?
The Republican leadership did blame President Obama, and to be fair, he was president when this happened. But to Scott's point, what was he going to do about it? It's a very delicate balance, and I'm sure President Obama felt very bad about the situation. But you're not going to go to war over this,
Well, that's the problem, is destabilizing that region has really big repercussions, and I think that's already Trump has realized that, because, he kept threatening to go to war, and I a couple months ago, and I think even he realized, and I'm sure China had said to him too, this is a big issue. You can't just blindly walk in here, because also China has a big effect on that too, because a lot of those refugees from North Korea would flee over into China, and that would destabilize that region again. The amount of deaths and destruction and economic, if you're even going to be talking economic and business side of things would really affect that region and affect the entire world. So it's not something you want to mess with lightly at all.
You mentioned refugees, and I do want to acknowledge that today is World Refugee Day.
I did not know that.
And last night, in honor of World Refugee Day, I saw a documentary called Chasing Asylum. Who knew that Aussies were such assholes?
Wait, the Australians won't let people seek asylum there?
Yeah. And they send them to these really remote islands with these detention centers that are horrifying. And I'm sure that we have similar things to that here in this country. There's a couple of them that Amnesty International is trying to shut down here in the United States. US. But I really... that documentary was really good. They somehow got cameras into these detention centers, and the woman who did the whole documentary, just her strategy was to get the movie out in a whole bunch of places around the world at the same time, so that the Australian government couldn't do anything to her because it had been so publicized already. So smart and gutsy woman.
Right.
Very smart. Right. And when you consider how Australia got started, you'd think there'd be some kind of empathy.
It'd be the opposite, right?
But apparently not.
But so yes,
Australia is not the only one.
No, but it's surprising, that you wouldn't think about it.
I'm going to stop the proceedings and make the worst joke I've ever made in the history of the show. Are you ready? Geez. You'd think they'd have empathy, but apparently they didgeridoo don't. I'm sorry. What were you going to say, Scott? I know it was awful. That's why I called them. Thank you. I'll be here, well, not all week, but next week. Anyway, what
be here for the next 8 minutes.
Yeah.
A few more, but about that.
But no, I had read an article about that, and I was really surprised because there was something, I think, one on near Papua New Guinea or some island up there that was just really, that was really deplorable, like really bad. What was the other? That I was shocked about.
Well, I'd be interested in finding out where they are here in the United States. If
there was one, I think it's called Burke. I'll look it up. Amnesty International will tell us.
Well, as Chelsea is researching, we're going to move on. As I talked a little bit about in the open, Sean Spicer, remember Spicy? Did his first on-camera press briefing in more than a week. Reporters have often been told that these proceedings, which were always carried live, they can't be filmed or broadcast with audio. So... that's actually news, even though it shouldn't be. Now, that's not fake news. That's just unfortunate news that actually became news. But what we got out of this briefing was that he expects President Trump to announce this week whether he secretly recorded conversations with former FBI Director James Comey, which means they really need to get their story straight if you're announcing that there's going to be an announcement.
Right.
Did you find the answer
it's
to...
It's called Berks. Berks is one of the
and that's here
ones.
In the...
It's not in California.
Okay. Also, Sean Spicer said he would not say whether Trump agrees with the unanimous conclusion that from the intelligence community that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Spicer's quote, "I have not sat down and talked to him about that specifically." And all this time, you know what? Here's the thing. I don't know how often he sits down and talks to Trump, so that might be true.
There was one other thing that he was asked that he said he didn't know the answer to that I thought was kind of silly.
Well, that's the Trump announcing whether he secretly recorded Comey, or there might be yet another thing. He also said that, this ties into the fact that the Senate GOP plans to hold a vote on the health care bill next Thursday. Once again, I think not this Thursday, I think next Thursday. They got to have it all together. So once again, we'll miss out on that because, as I mentioned, we won't be on the 4th of July. So
but I'll be tweeting about it for sure.
Yeah, so make sure you follow at SMan80. And the interesting thing about all this, Sean Spicer said President Trump, quote unquote, clearly wants Senate Republicans to put forward a health care bill that has heart. He would not confirm whether or not President Trump thought the House bill was, quote-unquote, mean, which was something we talked about last week. But he says he wants it to have heart, and I'm sorry, but that kind of heart care is not covered under the GOP health care bill. You're going to have to pay out of pocket. So that's too bad for Trump, although he can. And then the last thing on this issue, we'll talk a little bit about this. Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, the champions of the left. But they've all raised questions about how this bill is being drafted in private. And it's all backroom stuff. Chuck Schumer wants to know, how much time are we going to have to actually read this
2
before
hours.
we're called upon to vote? 2 hours would be plenty of time, I think.
I think that's the minimum
yeah,
number
I think you're right.
Hours.
So as we hear all of this, Scott, what do you think about where we're headed with having an actual vote right before the 4th of July.
Right, because they want to do it before the recess, and they want to do it because once they start getting closer to the fall, then it's getting too close to 18, and for things to be going into effect, they want to do it just enough to where it doesn't go into full effect before the midterms next year. And once again, we're seeing Mitch McConnell be just a sleazy, backhanded, hypocritical weasel. I think it's wrong what he's doing, because clearly if you're not confident with your bill, you're going to do it behind the scenes and try to just cram it through and get it done at the last minute.
You're going to meet with everybody that you know is on the fence and be like, what do we have to put in here for you and your district?
Can you answer this question? There are members like Mike Lee and Rand Paul that are supposed to be on this team, and they have even been excluded.
Right, and that's a problem.
Just a couple of staffers for...
And that's the thing, is this going to be constitutional? Like, how is it going to come down to say that you're going to do it and only give everyone a couple hours to actually see this and see what's in it and see what they're voting for, and basically say, oh yeah, we put this in here, we put that in there, don't worry about it, just go ahead and vote for it. And that's the concern, is what is going to go to Trump afterwards if they do vote on this and it passes. And it's very frightening to think that nobody has seen it, nobody has been advising on it, and I don't know why they're so dead set on doing this if it's going to end up hurting their own constituents that are voting next year. Why do they feel this need to do something like this?
Because somebody is paying them.
Well, that I get, but I mean, but taking that out, thinking that at some point, do they feel confident enough that they're going to all be reelected and they don't even have to worry about the repercussions? I think that's what they feel like, well, we're just going to get reelected anyways. What do we have to lose? And it's really upsetting to think
big-moneyed friends will even pour more
money to make sure that
election.
Millions and millions and millions are spent to have them eke out a re-election win. It's really sad to think that we've gotten to this point now where this is done in secret and nobody knows what's in it, and just to be able to say they repealed Obamacare, and of course they hate anything that Obama ever did. That's what someone had tweeted too a couple weeks ago. I think it was like, if he cured cancer, they would have come back and repealed that. Because,
we like cancer.
Yes, because they don't want anything that Obama did. They want to take that away no matter what.
It would probably be something about how cancer gets a bad rap, and you know what, Americans should be able to choose whether or not they have cancer. How
and the big government should not go in and try to
take my cancer away.
What you're going to do?
Look, to be devil's advocate to some point, I will of course invoke the quote from Nancy Pelosi when the the Obamacare bill basically passed, which was, well, we need to pass it so that we can see what's in it.
Right.
Well, no, neither side should be.
No.
You shouldn't be expecting people to vote on something they don't know what's in it. And these bills are so huge. I get it. You're going to try and sneak stuff in there. But that's exactly why people should have more time.
Right. No,
I think they should have to turn it in before 4th of July, but not be allowed to vote on it until after they get back.
And look, what Democrats did wasn't necessarily right either. But the funny thing is, they always go back and say, Republicans will say, oh, Democrats did this before, so but they take it to the next level. They always expand it, with the whole thing, which I didn't agree with, going back to when they did it in the Senate rules and they changed the rules for just the majority vote. That Harry Reid did. I was like, that was a terrible choice because we know the table was going to flip. But then Republicans take it and they're like, well, we're going to one-up that and we're going to make it even more ridiculous, more extreme. And that's what
down the line,
do.
Democrats will take it even a little bit further. And
I don't know.
At some point, no one will have to vote for anything.
Right. That's what I think. I mean, that's the thing. I don't know if Democrats would ever get to that point, because I'm hoping they realize from what they did with Harry Reid that it doesn't work. Yeah. The pendulum always swings, and Republicans should be smart enough to know that now too. But they feel like they want to have the win now and not worry about what's going to happen down in the future.
And I think that is a bipartisan thing, that everybody wants to win right now.
Right, it is.
Like, that's what they can agree on, is like, yeah, we want to get our thing right away.
But I think Republicans are taking even more extreme, because I think they do worry of the fact that the demographic changes are, and that if they feel they've got to do everything they can now, because they're going to be starting to whittle down. They're sort of at their peak right now. And it's going to get smaller from this point on, as far as, you get back to the state level, you get back to now, you have a very unpopular president regardless of what Rasmussen says, you have a very unpopular president there, midterms are going to come up, they're not going to be gaining seats anymore, they're pretty much at their peak, so they feel they've got to do what they can now.
Especially
when they're looking at the demographics in the future
they are
of the country.
definitely at their peak if the Supreme Court decides this gerrymandering case out of Wisconsin, where, just this Monday, the court agreed to take it. That if the Republicans basically lose that, it's over.
Take like a minute and explain.
What happens. Gerrymandering.
Yeah. Now, what happens if how would they rule that it would actually make a huge difference?
So the problem about gerrymandering is not even just necessarily that you're drawing the districts to favor one side over another, but that the Supreme Court has never been able to find a way to measure whether gerrymandering has actually been occurring, or if it's occurring because of partisan,
or if it's going too far. Because yes, we know that it's politicized and they're going to do it to favor one side or the other, but now they're trying to figure out, has it gone too far to where now it's preventing people from having a fair opportunity to vote?
So the plaintiff attorney in this Wisconsin case has offered this test where you minus the wasted votes of one side and the wasted votes of another divided by the total votes, and that's supposed to just tell you just a number about whether there is this efficiency gap. I don't claim to be smart enough to totally understand it, but it seems very reasonable. And if the court finds that, yeah, we're going to go with this efficiency gap test, and if a districting line, violates that, then we have to redraw the district lines, and then they'll be redrawn after the 2020 census is complete. So that can totally change everything.
It would, exactly. That will definitely be kind of like the domino that would fall for the rest of the gerrymandering issues that we've seen in North Carolina and other states that have been doing it to a point where it might be too extreme. So it is going to be very interesting to watch how that plays out.
To get back to healthcare for a moment, the demonot in the booth said, the comment went away, but basically he said that this is basically what happened from the Democrats for the first couple of years under Obama. They shoved it down everyone's throat. That's basically what we're saying, and we're saying it's wrong no matter who does it.
Right. I'm just saying that Republicans have just taken that to a new level, because Democrats, of course, did it too, and everybody does it when they have that power. Republicans have now taken it to a new level, and Mitch McConnell and his own self has taken it to a whole new level when it came to the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court never would have happened if it was not a simple majority.
Right, exactly.
So, and that's the way it always had been. So they take it to a new level, and they're doing that with the repeal and replace as well. To their own detriment, actually, I would add, because at some point it is going to catch up to them.
Our final story tonight is that former Attorney General Eric Holder is being characterized as the latest voice of the quote-unquote anti-Trump resistance and is mulling a presidential campaign of his own. So there goes the idea that you need to be charismatic to be president or a presidential candidate.
But if the tallest guy always wins,
right,
he would
then
win.
He would win.
He's pretty tall.
Wow. Why did Manute Bol never run for president? I don't think he could have. But it's a great point.
Besides that, I don't think he would be a very popular
I
guy.
don't think he, I feel like you got to go out and fundraise, and you have to schmooze, and for people that don't find President Trump particularly charming, you can certainly understand how he's able to work a room and get you to give him a lot of money, because he's spent a whole life doing
Well,
that.
I think Eric Holder's biggest problem is that he is seen as very establishment. He, given the opportunity to go after Wall Street guys when he was Attorney General, he didn't.
Yeah.
He got a little more progressive in Obama's second term, but he's generally perceived as a moderate. So he's very proud of the fact that he's the first black Attorney General, and he thinks that if that will give him some notoriety, then he'll take that and use that.
I mean, I think that there was a whole thing on the other day, actually, in the LA Times, and kind of going back to Georgia 6 and everything too, about how a lot of African American voters now are feeling like Democrats have just taken them for granted, and they feel they need to be wooed a little bit more. And because Obama's not on the ticket anymore, you have someone there that with charismatic and the one that's delivering the message and getting those people out to vote, that they feel that Democrats need to do a better job of really taking care of these voters and not taking them for granted. But do I think Eric Holder is necessarily that right fit? I think he's more of very good behind the scenes guy. I think he's definitely someone that's an important part of this party, but I don't know if I see him in front.
He would be. I think he would be very good at helping a charismatic, charming candidate craft policy.
And yes, and legal. I think he's great with that. I mean, actually, the state of California has had him on the payroll right now to help with that. That's a whole other story that I don't know that I even 100% agree with. But
the House or the only Senate, not Council.
Right, but I think he's very good. He can provide the legal stuff. He can provide a lot of the stuff that Obama actually wants to do. Again, with policy and gerrymandering and getting out the vote at the local level, he would be great at. I just don't know if he's our front of the scenes guy for the progressives.
Especially because after being Attorney General, he went to some law firm that is would be frowned upon by progressives.
Big conglomerate that has a lot of other special interests with their money and their spending and
Are there ties to Clinton cash? Don't answer it. It's just a joke. Well, on that note, we are out of time, but thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat. We always appreciate it. And of course, if you're listening after the fact or watching the archive, you can always tweet us at Trump Report ABTV. We'll be back next Tuesday, June 27th, 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern. It'll be myself, it'll be Chelsea, it'll be Scott, and our friend Brooke will be with us again.
Great.
So we'll have a full panel here. For me, Christian Bladt at Christian DMZ, Chelsea Galicia at Chelsea Galicia, Scott Moore at SMan80 with very many angry tweets at all sorts of people. Make sure you follow him.
Not angry, they're comical, but just slightly trolling.
Yes.
We'll get dramatic readings of them in a very soon episode. All right, thanks again to everybody, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.